Design thinking is a topic which is very close to my heart. I have been practicing design thinking for quite some time, and I think in the profession that I am in, I think design thinking helps a lot. Uh, Before I start, I'll just quickly give you a brief introduction. I am Rohit Vaze, if you don't already know, and I am an agile coach by profession, and I belong to the IT industry, right? So I think my job or my profile requires me to kind of interact with a lot of people and help them actually overcome problems and help them to kind of go in the right direction. That is what I do for a living. So I think design thinking kind of gives me the right tools to kind of help them achieve their goals and help them solve their problems. So just to give you a background, design thinking is a human centric approach to innovation. So I think we have been talking about innovation, how to bring about innovation, what does innovation mean. So I think these are all the topics that we have been kind of talking about for quite some time. But I think design thinking will give you a perspective, will actually give you some examples to ponder, to help you to understand how do you actually bring about that innovation. And it is not only restricted to products or physical or tangible things. It can be applied across the board. It can be you can actually apply design thinking principles to any sort of problem that you're facing. So we'll see as we go through the presentation. So as we go through the presentation, what I will do is I'll go through a few slides. I will actually stop in between just to make sure that we are all there in terms of understanding. If there are any questions, you can always post it onto the chat. Uh, in the interest of time and also in the interest of keeping the flow, I will basically take the questions at the end, but you can keep on posting your questions as and when they come to your mind. Okay. So let's kind of jump into the concept of design thinking. I will go through the slides one by one. So, all right. So just to put things into perspective, what is design thinking, right? So why are we talking about thinking, right? So there are different types of thinking that you are basically doing. So it's a something that happens subconsciously. You don't actually kind of label your thinking process, right? So you don't say that I am now currently I'm vertical thinking, I'm lean thinking, I'm laterally thinking. So you don't do that. It's something that happens unconsciously. But I think there are different ways of thinking. So if you kind of put a broad stroke to the things, you'll understand that there are five different types of thinkings that we will basically look at. One is vertical thinking, lean thinking, lateral thinking, systems thinking, and finally design thinking. So if you look at this, you'll just get to understand how are these different types of thinking different from each other. So if you look at vertical thinking, it is typically your analytical problem solving. So if you are actually sitting down and solving a maths problem, that is you are doing vertical thinking, because basically it is going to be a logical sequential steps that you will follow to come to an answer, and you will be coming to a single answer. So if I give you a problem something like 2 plus 2, you will basically come up with the answer 4, right? So I think that answer is universally accepted and that's a single answer. So that is your vertical thinking. Then you have the lean thinking. Lean thinking is something that begins with a problem, and with the existing knowledge of that problem, you bring in your concepts and of flow, value, perfection, getting rid of the waste, and that is how you come to a better solution. So that is your lean thinking, and this is typically actually practiced in the manufacturing industry or even in the software industry where I belong. So lean thinking is something that we try to apply to get rid of problems and get rid of wastages. Then you have the lateral thinking, which again begins with the problem and the existing knowledge of the problem, and then you brainstorm, right? So lateral thinking is where you actually, with a group of people or even yourself, you brainstorm on a problem, you come up with multiple answers and multiple solutions, and then you probably pick and choose from it. So that is your lateral thinking. So you are doing a brainstorming and you are coming up with answers. Then you have systems thinking. So system thinking actually begins with the knowledge of the entire ecosystem, right? So it is not restricted to the only problem at hand, but it is actually taking a holistic view of the entire system, and then trying to understand how there are interdependencies within the current problem, and how can you actually come up with a solution which will not disrupt the entire system. So that is why it is called a systems thinking. So you basically are not thinking in a silo. You are actually thinking about the entire system and coming up with a solution which will help you to address the problem at a systems level, not only at a local level. And finally, we come to design thinking. So if you look at all the points that have been mentioned in the first row, you will understand that the design thinking talks about the problem and the solution begins with the user, right? So this is a mindset change that the design thinking brings in, because you now think about the problem from the perspective of who is actually facing the problem, or the user in that case, right? Then you try to challenge the assumptions, you try to connect the dots, you try to understand the person who is facing the problem, you display empathy, and then you try to find a solution for that problem. So the problem is not only tackled on the merit of the problem, but it also considers who is facing the problem, why he is facing the problem, and what could be the right solution for that person, not for the problem. So the perspective of thinking is not to find a solution, it is to find the right solution if it will help the person who's actually facing the problem. So typically what we say is design thinking is a mindset, right? It's a mindset that in any case, when you face a problem, what are the steps that you take to actually find a solution to that problem? And this comes to us implicitly, right? I mean, once you start thinking about problems, the gut feeling is to kind of quickly get into thick of the action and come up with a solution, right? But I think design thinking gives you the tools to kind of take a step back, think about the problem, come up with a solution which will help everybody, not the impulsive solution. So that things put into context, let's try to define design thinking, right? So definitions are like verbose things, right? I mean, I don't want to get into the definitions, but I think I just wanted to put some nice English words around what design thinking means. But I think let's pay attention to the actually understanding what design thinking means, right? So design thinking is a human centered collaborative approach to problem solving and innovation that is creative, iterative, and practical. Okay? So all these words have been very carefully chosen when we are trying to define this, right? So there are like keywords like human-centered, collaborative approach. Then there are words like creative, iterative, and practical. Okay, so all these words have been very carefully chosen, and I think we'll talk about all these things as we move along to the sides. But just to give you a sophisticated definition to the design thinking, I think this is what it means. And there are multiple definitions, and if you go on to Google, I think you will get multiple definitions. But I think what I've tried to do is I've kind of tried to extract the essence of what design thinking is with this definition. So I think this is a mismatch of not mismatch, so mishmash of words, right? So I think that is what we have done here. But I think it will give you a perspective. Okay, follow on. So how does design thinking help? So I think we have been talking about design thinking. We have been talking about a mindset to kind of confront your problems and solutions. But how does this help actually? So it makes the problem solving process daring. Why daring? Because you are trying to break silos, you are challenging assumptions. So I think that is an important thing, because you are not only thinking in from a perspective of the problem, you are trying to understand the entire ecosystem around the problem and trying to empathize with the end user to make sure that the problem is clearly understood and defined before you can get into the solutioning of it, right? Then it is holistic. So as we talk about systems thinking, I think this is we are talking about the holistic view of the problem, right? Uh, which means that we are taking a systems thinking view and we are making sure that the entire system is taken into consideration while thinking about the problem. It is empathy driven. So empathy driven is a very important word here to pay attention to, right? So empathy driven is because now you are trying to empathize with the user and making and understanding what is actually troubling the user, right? So the problem statement is not always really visible, right? You have to define the problem. Okay, I think a couple of participants have raised their hand. Okay. Is there anything that I should pay attention to? Okay, let me check the chat. Okay, there was some background noise. Is it gone now? I think I hope it is gone. I will kind of continue. If there is background noise, just let me know. I'll stop maybe. But I think it is gone now. I knew what the background noise was, but let's carry on. Uh, all right. So I think I was talking about empathy. I think it is empathy driven, and we are talking about empathy. We have to be in the shoes of the actual person who's facing the problem, and then try to define that problem in a certain way to make sure that we find the solution to that problem. All right. And finally it is agile or iterative. So you don't find the solution to the problem in the first go. It has to be actually developed. You have to find the right solution. So you have to go through a series of solution finding steps so that you arrive at the right solution to the problem. So it's an iterative process. You don't jump right to the conclusion. You develop the solution step by step so that you address issues at every step, and then you reach the end where you are actually satisfied with whatever you have come up with, right? All right, so that puts how design thinking helps. So what are we actually trying to achieve here, right? So we are trying to achieve a change of mindset. So change of mindset from what? So typically what we do is we have this problem. Let's jump in and get into a room and brainstorm on solutions. I think this has happened a lot many times with me typically when there is an escalation or when there is some problem that we are facing. The impulse is that let's get into a room, let's talk about the problem, and let's get rid of the problem. Let's brainstorm and find the solution. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to find a local solution to a problem. So we are not trying to think deep. We are not trying to kind of understand the root cause of the problem, but we are trying to solve, to kind of come up with a solution which will solve the problem that you have at that point in time, right? So it's a local application. It's not a global application. So you get rid of the problem at that point in time, but that problem might reoccur in the future. So that is typically what we do. Or we have this technology. How can we? What can we use it for? Right. So that too happens a lot of time, that there is some new technology in the market, and everybody is kind of striving to get a piece of that technology, and go to the market and be the first ones to kind of be there and show off their technology. But what happens is in that rat race, you basically forget the user part of it, right? You just try to use the technology for what the technology is, not for what problems it will actually solve in the real life. So that is what we are trying to change our mindset from. Or the third typical solution is, our competitors have just launched X. How can we quickly do X, right? So if there is a competitor that we have in the market and that he has launched something in the market, now we have to kind of go one up, and we have to kind of launch something right away into the market and come up with something which will make sure that we have our presence in the market in that category. But we then do not we just get into that competition mode, right? We don't think about it, and we don't actually want to get into a situation where there are just products in the market and that they are not problem solvers, right? So that is something that we want to change our mindset from. And where do we want to go? So we want an approach to solving design problems by understanding user needs and developing insights to solve these needs. So we want to take a step back. We need to understand that every product is in the market to solve a problem, right? So that is kind of how I define a product. So it can be anything. So if there is a product that is in the market, that product is there for solving a problem. So it is not there to kind of show your technological prowess. It is there to solve a problem. So do you have an approach to solving problems which will understand what the user's problems are in the first place, and then actually launch it? So that is what we are trying to understand. Do you have the right insights to define the problem correctly and then solve it? When taken to its fullest, it's a mindset and not a process, right? So as I said, design thinking is a mindset. We want to actually imbibe this mindset and make sure that we understand the step-by-step process that it takes us through, and how does every step help us to reach a position where we are better suited to understand the problem and solve it. That is how it works. And only through contact, observation, and empathy with the end users that will be able to find the right solution for them in their environment. Right? So it is not about finding a solution, but it is also finding a solution which will be fit for their environment, fit for purpose, right in their context, and also make sure that it is helping them to kind of get rid of the problem that they're currently facing. All right. So with this, I think we have reached somewhere in the middle of the presentation. I'll maybe take a pause and look at the chat just to see if all is well. And if you are guys are still there with me, just type still awake for me to just make sure that I have not lost you guys in between. All right. Yeah. Going on well. Still yep awake. Great. Great. Perfect. Thank you. So with that, I'll continue. I think this is going to be a brief introduction to the concept of design thinking. I think typically when I do this in the classroom, I have a lot of fun doing it with people because I think we try to keep it as interactive as possible, and then we have this workshop where we try to make things. So I think that is something that happens typically in the workshop. But I think let's talk about the concept at hand. Okay. I'll move on. Okay. So why design thinking? Now, so we have been ranting about design thinking. We are talking about changing the mindset. We are talking about uh, going into the shoes of the end user and trying to find a solution. So why do we actually want to do design thinking? So to put it very simply, we want we want to move from making people want things to making things people want. Okay, so this is a very product centric definition, I would say. But as I said in at the beginning, I think this is not restricted to tangible products. This is also can be actually brought about in the case of your simple problems that you face in day-to-day lives. I think we'll talk about examples also as we move along. But I think the in essence, I think we are trying to shift our focus from making people want things to making things people actually want. Right? So that is the shift in the mindset that will be brought about if you embrace design thinking. Okay. And why should you do that? So what is about all this innovation that we are talking about? So where where does this innovation lie actually? All right. So if you look at these three domains, there is people who desire products, who desire technology, or they desire new things in life to solve new problems that they face every day. Then there is technology which keeps on evolving all the time. So every few years, new technology comes in and disrupts everything. So you have to kind of adapt to this new technology. And then there is this business. So business is nothing but the viability. People who are making these things have to actually sustain their business, right? So they can't just keep on making products and not make any profit on it, because otherwise they'll go bankrupt, and that will be the end of it. But I think these three domains actually coincide together, and the sweet spot is the design innovation, right? So when all these things achieve their right balance, that is where you when you get the design innovation, right? So the people, there is the desirability factor, then there is the technology, which is the feasibility factor, right? So if you have the right technology, you will be able to make things which you actually desire. And then there is the business, which is the viability. So is this business viable, or is this making this product viable? Will we make any profit out of it to keep the business sustainable? So when you actually talk about these things together, the sweet spot is where the design innovation lies, and that is where we are trying to go with the design thinking. So how do you achieve that sweet spot, right? How do you make those products which are actually desirable, feasible, and viable, all three? And if you remember the definition, in the definition we talked about something that is creative and practical also. So that is the business viability part of it, right? So it has to be practical in order to make it and sustain the production. With that, I think let's talk about the design thinking steps now. So we have been actually talking a lot about design thinking as a concept. So how do you actually bring it in practice, right? How do you actually make sure that design thinking is understood, and it is actually implemented? Okay. So if you look at these steps, I think these are the this is the 5 step process. It starts with empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Okay, fairly simple, very simple to understand. So empathize, I think this is the first step in the entire process. What do you mean by empathize? Is when we talked about understanding the user, right? So we have to basically understand what is the problem that is faced by the user and who the user is, right? So, and of the definition of the problem will depend on who the user is. So if you take a problem, if you try to define it from a perspective of a, say, a 60-year-old person, and the same problem from the perspective of a say, a 15-year-old person, those two will be totally different. So I think the solution to the problems will be totally different depending upon who you ask. So I think that is how I want to empathize. So how do you empathize? You There are different techniques. So I think whatever you see at the bottom of those circles, those are the techniques to actually implement those steps, right? And I think if we go in deeper into these techniques, I think we'll take up another 2 hours, and maybe even more than that. But I think I'll just kind of summarize these techniques for you. But there are techniques like contextual inquiry, there are user workshops, identifying personas. So these are some of the techniques which will help you to kind of understand what the user is feeling, or and try you if you try to put some words around that, I think that is what you mean by empathize. So trying to be in the shoes of that person to define that problem correctly. All right. Uh, I thought, just to give you an example of empathy, I think I was kind of searching some videos on YouTube, and I came across this Disney Pixar movie called Ratatouille. If you have heard of Ratatouille, I think during the animation process of Ratatouille, there is a scene in that movie where the chef Linguini, who's the protagonist, he actually falls into the water and trying to rescue the rat, whose name is Remy, right? So I think in that scene, when he falls in the water and comes out, you see that he's fully drenched, right? And what the animators were trying to do is that the animators actually themselves wore the clothes that Linguini was wearing, and they actually jumped into water just to make sure that when he comes out, what will be his behavior with all those wet clothes, his wet hair, how would he actually behave, right? And that is what you mean by empathize, right? And you are trying to kind of get into shoes of that person and trying to basically animate in a certain way to make sure to make it more realistic, but you're trying to empathize with that protagonist and see what happens when he actually fall in the water. So that is just an example. It's not directly design thinking, but it is an example of what empathy could mean, right? So that is something that I liked. Uh, Once you empathize with the user, I think you have there are different ways of actually doing it. So these are only a few ways of doing it. There are other things like empathy maps. There is journey maps. There is contextual inquiry. So you can there are interviews. I think the interviews is also a very powerful tool to empathize with the user. You talk about the problem, try to get into their heads and analyze what they're feeling and what they're actually trying to make out of the problem. So that will give you a great perspective on it. Then once you empathize with the user, you try to define the problem, right? So I think that is a very important step. So you clearly articulate what the actual problem is, and that is the very important step in this, because unless you define the problem correctly, the solution will not come out the way you desire or the way the user desires, right? So that is why defining the problem is highly important. So how do you do it? There are again different techniques. So there is a point of view. So you are thinking from point of view of that person, right? So what would be the problem that you're actually facing? So uh, or there are other techniques like how might we. So you define something and you say that how might we achieve that, right? So if you are trying to put a problem in, say you want the ice cream, you have ice cream in hand and you are standing in the sun and your ice cream should not melt. That is something that you desire. So in order for that to happen, what the problem that you need to define is, can you change the weather? No. I think, can you change the property of ice cream? No. Then what can you actually do? So that is where you actually have to define the problem. So you cannot stop the ice cream from melting probably when it is in your hand, but you cannot actually change the temperature when you're standing outside. But what you can do is you can maybe design a cone in a certain way which will stop that ice cream from spilling all over, right? So I think defining the problem is a really important step. And if you define the problem correctly, I think that is when you will be able to go on to the next steps and achieve the best results out of it. Okay. Moving on to the next steps, now you have actually empathized with the user, you have defined the problem correctly, and now you have to ideate. Ideate is nothing but brainstorm. So now you have the protagonist, you have the user, you have the problem definition. Now you have to brainstorm. So brainstorm is nothing but bring on your ideas. There are no right or wrong ideas. You just have to think and come up with solutions. That is something that we did with our ideathon, right? The 21-day idea challenge. You came up with a lot of ideas, right? Right there were, and you did not filter out those ideas. You just noted them down. This is what you basically do. But in this case, you just have a problem definition now, and you are now focused and thinking in that direction about generating ideas. So you collate all the ideas that you have. Again, there are different techniques to do it. So there are user journey maps. There is the mind maps. I think we last month, I think we had a session on mind maps. So I think mind maps is a very powerful tool actually to ideate, collate all your ideas in one place, and help us to kind of take them forward. Mind map, you have brainstorming. So these are some of the techniques that you can use to ideate. And once you ideate, once you come up with a bunch of ideas, then you actually brainstorm and then try to find out which are the ideas which are actually focused in the right direction, which will help us to find the right solution to the problem. That is when you move from idea to prototype. So prototype is nothing but actually coming up with a solution, or a tangible output to it. All right. So I think prototype is something where you bring your ideas into reality. Right? So if you talk about it, a typical product scenario, you have the idea. Now you create something which is a prototype. You create low fidelity prototypes. So these are like something which is drawn on a piece of paper. It can be a sketch. It can be wireframes. It can be something that you have made out of by folding papers, or you just use some junk items that you could find, and you create something out of it, maybe from pieces of newspaper, something like that, which will give you something which is tangible and which will help you to visualize your problem, right? And visualize a solution to the problem. So that is something that you do with prototype. And this is a process where this is something that is which is actually iterative, right? So this is basically that you don't stop with one prototype, you don't stop with one idea. You keep on generating more ideas. You keep on generating more prototypes, and you put them into testing, right? So testing is something that you put those products in the hands of the end users, your actual people who are going to use it, and then get feedback from it. Once you get feedback, you either go back to the drawing board or you refine that prototype to come up with a product. So I think that is how you keep on iterating on these products, and keep on iterating on these tangible objects to come up with a solution. And that is what design thinking is in nutshell, right? You empathize with the user, you define your problem, you ideate, you come up with ideas, you build a prototype, you show something, you find a probable solution to the problem, you build something, you go and test it, and take the feedback and put it back into the system. Keep on doing it. So that is why we call it as an iterative process. This keeps on happening, and we keep on generating new products until we are happy with it, and until the problem in the first place kind of put us on this path is solved. That is how you actually keep on doing this. All right. So let's look at a few examples also, right? So I think I've been talking about a lot about this concept and how do you do it. So I think there are lots of examples even in your day-to-day life which will help you to kind of understand how design thinking was applied to kind of make sure that though you get rid of those problems. So if you look at these some of these images that I have actually collated, this is like uh, if you look at the first image, this is like an MRI scan, right? So in case of MRI scan, I think there was a problem for doctors where children were not able to actually kind of go through this MRI machine, and they were, if you know what MRI is, that you have to be very very still during this entire process. You cannot move around and watch their imaging process. So I think typically children were scared of getting into this, and I think what they did was they actually decorated this entire MRI room with images of cartoons, and they played cartoons on the TV, and they used some sounds through headphones to make sure that this is a friendly environment for the children who are coming in, and that is how they helped children to stay still on that bed, and while the imaging happens, right? So I think that was a very challenging problem, and that is how the doctors actually made sure that they get rid of this problem. So I think that they had to kind of go back to the drawing board, understand what is intimidating the children, and how do we actually make this a more friendly place rather than making this as a clinic. So this is typically what happens when you apply the design thinking principles on the real life problems. Again, if you look at the second image, it is about Disney, right? So Disney, back in the day when they were creating the Disney World, it was a very different concept, right? So Walt Disney wanted a place where everybody could enjoy, and typically during that time, amusement parks were are where just children used to enjoy those rides, and the parents used to kind of get bored because they had nothing to do. So that was a problem that he went ahead to solve. How could we actually engage people in this land, in this fantasy world, and create the happiest place on earth? So that is what they called as Disneyland, right? Happiest place on earth. So how do you make this? How do you engage the entire audience? How do you make sure that the children are happy as well as the parents are happy? If the parents are happy, they will spend more on this, and that is how the business will boom. That is how the design thinking principles were applied to make sure that there is something for the children as well as for the parents. Coming back to something which is like day-to-day mundane real life, if you look at these tomato ketchup bottles, there are still these glass bottles where if you try to pour ketchup onto your plate, it becomes really difficult. It doesn't actually obey the rules of gravity, I would say. Sometimes it doesn't fall. Sometimes it so much falls off that you can't put it back into the bottle. So there is a problem. How do you get rid of that problem? So you come up with a bottle which is inverted, which is actually you can squeeze the bottle and put the tomato sauce uh, which the amount which you need. So you don't want extra tomato sauce coming out of it, and you don't want spillage also. So if you press it and if you let it go, I think nothing will come out. So I think you will stop the wastage also. So I think these are some of the typical problems that were solved using design thinking. Or if you look at the remotes also, right? So typically, if you have look at the Apple TV remote or the Amazon Fire Stick remote, these have very few buttons on these. But if you look at the older remotes or even the remotes of some televisions, you will see that there is a huge host of buttons, and you get lost. I mean, which button to operate to kind of get to the right menu? How do you change the contrast settings, brightness, everything? So I think that was a problem that the designers took on. I think what they do, they wanted to reduce the number of buttons on the screen, but to make the menu on the screen very intuitive so that you can operate it through the remote and get to reach the desired position. Right? So you don't have to put so many buttons on the remote and not make it so much complicated. So I think these are some of the typical examples. If you talk about examples which are, say, not tangible, right? So I mean, say for example, if you have a problem, typically in our IT environment, we have like customer escalations happening, right? So there is no product as such being developed here, but there is some problem that the customer is facing, and we have to get rid of that problem. So how do you go about it, right? So you can still apply the design thinking principles here, right? So instead of actually fixing the problem and telling the customer that yeah, the problem has been fixed, you take one step back. You try to understand the problem from a customer's perspective, right? So you try to understand what you talk to the customer, you calm him down. You try to understand what is it that is bothering him. Is it the code that is failing, or is it that somebody is not responding? What is the actual problem that is plaguing him, right? And that is when you get to the bottom of this, and then that is where you try to define the problem correctly. Then you come up with ideas which will help you to identify the root cause of the problem and then fix it. So it is not about finding a local solution to the problem, but it is about also finding the root cause of the problem and then finding the right solution. So design thinking is not restricted only to tangible objects as products. It is also about problem solving in day-to-day life, typical problems that we face, problems that we face with colleagues, right? So in this I have this example where in my office there was a colleague who was kind of perceived as a non-performing, right? So she was perceived as somebody who's slow learner, right? So So I think in that case, what I did was, I think I had a chat with that person. I understood what the problem was, right? So the problem was not that that she was not smart. The problem was that because in this virtual environment we are all working from home, she was not finding the right people to talk to. She was not able to kind of express herself in front of the right people and get a solution to the problem. So that was the main problem, right? And that is how we actually got to the bottom of the main problem. Then we tried to give her some ideas as to what she can do to make sure that she's reaching out to the right people, she's being heard, she's making sure that her performance is being judged on the right parameters. So all those ideas were done. Then we went into the prototype. So what does prototype mean is that basically you take some of these ideas and implement them and show the results to the people. And when the people see those results, actually that is when they will basically accept that you are on the right path, right? So that is where you test it. And if it works, they give the feedback that yes, it is working. So now you take that path and move forward. If it is not working, you pick up the different idea and then implement it and get feedback from the stakeholders. That is how it goes on. It's an iterative process. So I think these are some of the examples. I think there are loads of examples that I can talk about, and I think in the interest of time, I'll not go deeper into this. But I think what I'll do is I'll go to the next slide. I have a video here. Okay, I have a video. So IDEO is a company who's actually a pioneer in the field of design thinking. So what I'll do is I think I'll play this video for, and you will get a feel of how this thing works in real life. Okay, so I'll play this video. I will make sure that
one company's secret weapon for innovation.
if you can hear the video, just type yes in the chat. Great.
We went to IDEO, the product design folk, and said, take something old and familiar, like say, the shopping cart, and completely redesign it for us in just 5 days. ABC News correspondent Jack Smith tells us what happened next.
9 in the morning, day one, and these people have a deadline to meet.
So welcome to the kickoff of the shopping cart project.
This is Palo Alto, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and these are designers at IDEO, probably the most influential product development firm in the world. IDEO has designed everything from high-tech medical equipment to the 25-foot mechanical whale in the movie Free Willy, and the first computer mouse for Apple. Smith ski goggles, Nike sunglasses, NEC computer screens. Hundreds of products we take for granted.
The point is that we're not actually experts at any given area. You know, we're kind of experts on the process of how you design stuff. So we don't care if you give us a toothbrush, a toothpaste tube, a tractor, a space shuttle, you know, a chair. It's all the same to us. We want to figure out how to innovate by using our process, applying it.
Project leader is Peter Skillman, a 35-year-old Stanford engineer. Project leader because he's good with groups, not because of seniority. He's only been at IDEO for 6 years. The rest of the team is eclectic, but that's typical here. Whitney Mortimer, Harvard MBA. Peter Coughlin, linguist. Tom Kelly, Dave's brother, marketing expert. Jane Fulton-Suri, psychologist. Alex Kazaks, 26, a biology major, who's turned down medical school 3 times because he's having too much fun at IDEO. Safety emerges early as an important issue.
22,000 child injuries a year, and so they're hospitalized injuries. I mean, there are many others.
And theft. It turns out a lot of carts are stolen. As the team works, it becomes clear there are no titles here, no permanent assignments.
The other side gives us a lot of help, says, be safe. I'll give you a big red ball on a post, and that says you're a big guy. If you got a ball, you're a senior vice president. You know, what do I care? The desk, the red ball, it's all the same. In a very innovative culture, you can't have a kind of hierarchy of here's the boss and the next person down, the next person down, the next person down, because it's impossible that the boss is the one who's had the insightful experience with shopping carts. It's just not possible.
The team splits into groups to find out firsthand what the people who use, make, and repair shopping carts really think.
Okay, go. problem with the plastic cart is the wind catches it.
Yeah.
And these things have been clocked at 35 across the parking lot.
Oh, man.
That's actually a pretty good point.
The trick is to find these real experts, and so that you can learn much more quickly than you could by just kind of doing it the normal way and trying to learn about it yourself.
From everything I read, these things aren't that safe either, you know? So probably the seat itself is going to have to be redesigned.
One of the interesting things for me is looking at how people really don't like to let go of the cart, except for the professional shopper, whose strategy is to leave the cart at various places.
3:30 in the afternoon, and the group is back at IDEO. There is no let-up.
Each team is going to demonstrate and communicate and share everything that they've learned today.
A shopping cart has been clocked at 35 miles an hour traveling through a parking lot in the wind.
We were in the store, 2 hours, and it was truly frightening just to see the kind of stuff going on.
You ought to designate some people to make damn sure that the store owner's point of view is represented.
After 9 straight hours, the team is tired. They call it a day.
So,
Everybody cool?
well, that's great. Thanks a lot. We had a great time today.
IDEO's mantra for innovation is written everywhere. One conversation at a time. Stay focused. Encourage wild ideas. Defer judgment. Build on the ideas of others.
That's the hardest thing for people to do, is to restrain themselves from criticizing an idea. So if anybody starts to nail an idea, they get the bell. You know.
The ideas pour out and are posted on the walls.
Oh, the blind, the privacy blind. Like when you're buying 6 cases of condoms, no one sees. If it doesn't nest, we don't have a solution.
Organized chaos. It's not organized. What it is it's focused chaos.
Vote with your Post-it, not with an idea that's cool, but with an idea that's cool and buildable. If it's too far out there and can't be built in a day, then I don't think we should vote on it. Enlightened trial and error succeeds over the planning of lone genius.
Enlightened trial and error succeeds over the planning of the lone genius. If anything sums up IDEO's approach, that is it. Worried that the team is drifting, what can only be called a group of self-appointed adults under Dave Kelly holds an informal side session.
4 or 5 teams. 4 or 5 teams, and we give each team a need area. It becomes very autocratic for a very short period of time in defining what things people are going to work on.
If you don't work under time constraints, you could never get anything done because it's a messy process and go on forever.
Back at the shop, it is 6 o'clock. The 4 mock-ups are ready for showing.
Baskets also can be, if you think you will have more volume, baskets can be put in.
A modular shopping cart you pile hand baskets onto. A high-tech cart that gets you through the traffic jam at checkout.
That you could mount a scanner on the shopping cart so that you as the customer, as you pull it off the shelf, would scan each item.
One that's built around child safety, and another that lets shoppers talk to the supermarket staff remotely.
Yeah, where can I find a yogurt?
But the adults, again, decide more work needs to be done before the mock-ups can be combined into one last prototype.
Why don't we have all the carts come up here for a second?
I think you take a piece of each one of these ideas and kind of back it off a little bit and then put it in the design.
The design is still not there. But there's another motto at IDEO: fail often in order to succeed sooner. And some of the team will be up half the night trying to put together a design that finally does work.
There it is! So we took the best elements out of each prototype.
The cart, which is designed to cost about the same as today's carts, is different in every other way.
What do you think?
Well, I'm very proud of the team. I think it's great.
Does this work for you?
Works for me great. It's also beautiful.
The cart's wheels turn 90 degrees so it can move sideways. No more lifting up the rear in a tight spot. And you shop in a totally different way. The bags are hung on hooks on the cart's frame. Remember, there is no basket here.
At first, I was a little shocked, but I think you have some fantastic ideas here. It needs a little refining, but I think that it's great. I mean, we would want them.
She also gave us some really good comments about how we can make this thing better.
A lot of hours. Also, an open mind, a boss who demands fresh ideas be quirky and clash with his, a belief that chaos can be constructive, and teamwork, a great deal of teamwork. And these are the recipe for how innovation takes place. This is Jack Smith for Nightline in Palo Alto, California.
All right. So that was it. Okay, I think with that, we have reached the end of the presentation. Thanks a lot, and to be patient and listening to me and not interrupting. I mean, you couldn't, but thank you for not interrupting, anyways. But yes, I think we are open for questions. I think if there are any questions, you do post them into the chat box. I'll kind of scroll and see if there were any in the. Does design thinking involve controlled chaos? Yes, yes. It actually does involve controlled chaos. What it means is that there is a facilitator involved who's actually making sure that all these ideas are actually collated and shown to everybody. They are visualized, and all this chaos that is happening on the ground is converted into actually some which is productive, right? So this is controlled chaos, and it is something that is actually encouraged in this entire process. How can we apply this existing products? Similarly, I think with existing products, I think what happens is that you have to actually listen to the feedback, right? So you have a product which is already there in the market. Now you have to listen to the customers that what are the good points about the product and what are the not so good points about the product, and what are their pain areas when they're using the product. So if you can define those problems, then you can actually go back to the drawing board and then you try to define the problem correctly. So if they are facing a problem, what is the problem that is actually the real life problem, or is there any root cause behind it, right? So you get into onto those steps one by one, and then you will come up with ideas to improve your product, right? So you do it iteratively. You kind of take one idea, implement it, go to the end users again, and this process goes on. That is how you can actually improve your existing products. Okay, how do you develop a skill further and how to get started? Okay, so I think this is something that actually comes with experience. So I think this is not a degree or a diploma, something like that. But I think what you need to do is understand uh, the tools that are needed to kind of conduct. You talked about during empathize phase. You talked about conducting interviews. You talked about conducting contextual inquiry. You tried talked about creating empathy maps. So once you start learning those techniques, and you will get better at those techniques, and you'll understand that where what technique gives you the best result. That is when you actually pick up that technique and kind of further refine it and make sure that it works every time. But it may not be the same technique that works everywhere. It depends on the end user who they are. So again, as I said, if you are working with, say, 60-year-old people, you will adopt a different technique. If you are working with, say, 50-year-old, you will try to adopt a different technique. So that is how you actually try to implement it that way. I hope I'm answering your questions right. So just let me know if they are getting answered. All right. So ideating and brainstorming are the two different stages that really work well in classrooms and make the class interactive. You can't imagine the kind of ideas that kids come up with. Absolutely, and I think not only kids. I think when I have conducted this exercise with adults, and I love the way they actually do it. So just to give you an idea, what we used to do is we used to come up with a gift giving challenge, right? So what you do is you pair up as groups, and you try to come up with the best gift possible to the person who you are paired up with, right? So you conduct interview with that person, you understand what is their definition of the best gift, and from there you come up with a prototype. You refine on that prototype, and then ultimately what you come up with is the gift that you give to that person. So I think during this entire workshop, I think we have great fun. I think the ideas that actually come up are really great, and people love the way so bus rapid transit system implemented in Ahmedabad based on user centricity is also one of the examples at a larger scale. Definitely, I think there are lots of examples actually being done typically during town planning also. So I think bus system is one of them. Even the cycling tracks that get implemented are also at least in theory following the design principle. The execution is that at least in theory they do comply to it. How can we use design thinking to make the inner circle more impactful? Oh, that's a good question. That's from Sudhi itself. Sudhi, so I think uh, I think we can use this. My mind was this 21-day challenge, idea generation challenge that we had. Actually, we could give it a twist and kind of apply the design thinking principles to the problem, and then actually come up with a design idea generation challenge on that, right? So that we can give that a twist, and we can probably see how this design thinking actually works in principle, right? So we could start with empathize and end with the testing of those ideas, but I think defining would be the important part of it. So I think probably that is something that I can think of. All right, any more questions, guys? We've already kind of surpassed our time. I think up there I can see the clock. But yes, we replaced Flash player uh, from tool and by HTML5. Yeah, typical, yes. There are lots of examples to be found. I mean, now that you know about it, if you go back and look at different products, you will be able to understand how they were actually developed. So I mean, I have a product with me right now. This is basically a cup that my 3-year-old son uses to drink milk every morning, right? So I mean, typically how 3-year-olds are, they will actually violently shake the cup, they will throw the cup everywhere, and the milk should not spill. So I mean, that was the problem that they went on to define, and they created this cup. So I have this cup with me right now, right beside me, and you can see that there is some liquid in the cup, but it is not spilling. So there are lots of products. If you go around your house and start looking at products in a different angle, you will see that these products were actually developed using design thinking. So now that, as I said, now that you know this concept, you will now start seeing things in a different way. Now you will see that most of the things that you see right now in front of you have been created using design thinking.
Yes, very much. And also, we will also start looking at the problems of our lives from a design thinking lens. So that's just amazing, guys. Let's flush the chat box. So I think thank you, Rohit, for an amazing session.